After years of perfecting the ideal relationship, we found out that love wasn't about perfection at all. What happens when two people learn the hardest lessons of their lives and embrace the chaos of love? The truth will shock you, this is how we survived the mess. It was a regular Tuesday afternoon when Meredith, my girlfriend of 3 years, sat me down for a serious conversation. I'm 28, she's 26, and we've been living together for about 18 months. Our relationship had been relatively stable, no major hiccups, just the usual day-to-day life that comes with being in a long-term relationship. Wanting the guard for essential form, those words, so simple and direct, struck me in a way I wasn't prepared for. They weren't the words of someone breaking up with you, but they weren't the words of someone who was deeply in love with you either. It was a strange mix of honesty and something else, a feeling that I couldn't quite place at that moment. For a few seconds, I just sat there, staring at her, trying to process what she had just said. It didn't quite make sense. I had expected many things in our relationship, but this wasn't one of them. She continued, explaining how she felt, but it all seemed to be coming at me in waves, and I couldn't seem to catch up. I care about you, I really do. But it's just not the same anymore, she said, her voice quiet but firm. The romance, the gifts, the good morning texts, the spontaneous little surprises we used to have, those things just don't seem to come as naturally to me anymore. Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. There's something about the truth that is both relieving and painful at the same time. In that moment, I felt a flood of emotions, confusion, disbelief, and even a little bit of anger. But more than anything, I felt a sense of helplessness. It was clear that something had changed between us, but I couldn't pinpoint exactly when it happened or why. I tried to stay calm, to take it all in, but my mind was racing. Thanks for the clarification, I said, trying to sound composed, but inside, I felt like I was unraveling. I didn't want to make the situation worse, but I also didn't know how to respond to something like that. I didn't know if I should be angry, sad, or simply accept it. She looked at me, almost nervously, waiting for me to say something, but I wasn't sure what I could say that would make things better or clearer. After all, how do you respond to someone telling you that they care about you, but they're not in love with you? How do you fight against something as intangible as love fading away? I'm sorry, Meredith said, her eyes filled with regret. I didn't mean to hurt you. It's just how I feel. And I can't keep pretending everything's okay when it's not. I nodded, not really knowing how to react. On one hand, I understood what she was saying. Relationships evolve, and sometimes feelings change. It wasn't like we were two strangers suddenly finding each other irritating, but it was clear that something had shifted between us. The spark that had once made everything exciting, the little flirty texts, the spontaneous dates, the random acts of affection, those things were no longer there. The fire had dimmed, and I wasn't sure how to reignite it. I understand, I said softly, but even as the words left my mouth, I wasn't sure if I truly understood. Could I understand something like this? How do you understand that the person you've spent 3 years with, someone you thought you'd spend the rest of your life with, no longer felt the same way about you? The conversation continued, but it felt like everything was moving in slow motion. We spoke about how we had both changed, how our relationship had evolved, and how we had both unintentionally grown distant from each other over time. There was no specific moment we could pinpoint. It wasn't like something catastrophic had happened. It was more like a slow burn, a gradual shift that neither of us had really noticed until it was too late. I don't know what to do with this, I admitted. I never thought we'd get here. Meredith sighed. Neither did I. But I think we need to be honest with each other. Maybe we're not meant to be the way we were anymore. But that doesn't mean we can't figure out what comes next. That was the hardest part, to swallow the uncertainty. I didn't know if we could fix this. Part of me wanted to fight for what we had, to do whatever it took to reignite the spark. But another part of me wondered if we had already outgrown each other, if we had already reached the point where we were just two people who happened to share a space together, without that deeper connection that used to bind us. The next few hours were spent talking about what went wrong, about our future, about whether we could still salvage something from this relationship. There were tears, there were moments of silence, and there were even moments of laughter as we both tried to lighten the mood. But deep down, I knew this conversation was one we couldn't just brush aside. We had to figure out where we stood. By the end of the conversation, we both agreed that we needed space. Not necessarily a breakup, but a step back to figure out what we really wanted, what we needed from each other, and whether we could rebuild the foundation of our relationship. We didn't know what the future held, but we knew that we couldn't keep pretending things were fine if they weren't. And so, that was where we left it, at the edge of uncertainty. Neither of us knew where we'd end up, but we both agreed that something had to change. Whether it was a change within ourselves or a change in the dynamic of our relationship, something had to give. I wasn't sure what the future would hold, but I knew that the days ahead would be a journey of discovery, not just about Meredith, but about myself and what I truly wanted out of this relationship. After the conversation, things between Meredith and I felt different. It wasn't like we were suddenly strangers, but the air between us had definitely shifted. There was an unspoken tension that lingered, a kind of awkwardness that hadn't been there before. It was the kind of tension you feel when you know something isn't quite right, but you don't know exactly how to fix it. For the next few days, we went about our routines like nothing had changed. We still shared meals, still spent time together in the evenings, but there was a noticeable distance between us. It wasn't physical, no, we were still living in the same house, still sharing the same space, but it was emotional. The intimacy we had once shared was now replaced with something more distant, more guarded. It was like we were both walking on eggshells, unsure of what to say or do, afraid that one wrong move could cause everything to unravel. I tried to keep my distance at first, not wanting to make things worse by pushing too hard. But at the same time, I couldn't shake the feeling that something needed to change. I didn't want to be stuck in limbo, in this weird space where we were neither truly together nor apart. It was the worst of both worlds, and I didn't know how to navigate it. I remember one night, after dinner, Meredith and I were sitting on the couch in the living room, watching a show we used to love. The kind of show that used to make us laugh together, the kind of thing we'd talk about for hours afterward. But that night, it was different. We sat there in silence, both of us glued to the screen, but not really watching. It was as if we were both in the same room, but our minds were somewhere else entirely. I couldn't take it anymore. The silence was deafening. I had to say something, anything, to break it. Meredith, I said, turning toward her. Are we okay? Really? She looked at me, her expression unreadable. For a moment, I thought she might brush it off, pretend like everything was fine. But instead, she sighed and shook her head. No, she admitted softly. We're not. But I don't know how to fix it. Her words hit me harder than I expected. I had been hoping, somewhere deep down, that we could just sweep it under the rug and pretend everything was fine. But that wasn't reality, and we both knew it. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that the root of our problem wasn't about us not loving each other anymore. It was about the fact that we had both changed our priorities, our needs, our desires. We were no longer the same people we had been when we first started dating, and our relationship hadn't kept up with those changes. I don't want to lose you, I said, the words slipping out before I could stop them. But I also don't want to keep pretending like we're happy when we're not. Meredith nodded, her eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and understanding. I don't want to lose you either. But I don't know if we can keep going the way we are. There was a long silence between us as we both let the weight of those words sink in. I knew what she was saying, and honestly, I had been feeling the same way. We were both stuck in this limbo, too afraid to let go completely, but too afraid to keep holding on to something that no longer felt right. I think we need to figure out what we want, I said, finally breaking the silence. What do we really want out of this? I don't know, Meredith said, her voice barely above a whisper. I really don't know. That was the problem, wasn't it? We didn't know. We didn't know if we were just going through a rough patch or if this was something deeper, something that couldn't be fixed. I wanted to believe that it was just a phase, that we could work through it. But a part of me wondered if we had already outgrown each other. The next few days were filled with more conversations. Tough conversations. Conversations about what we wanted in the future, about whether we could still build something together, about whether it was even worth trying to fix things. It was exhausting, emotionally draining, and at times, it felt like we were just going in circles. One night, as I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, I couldn't help but wonder if this was the end of the road for us. Was this the natural conclusion to our relationship? Could we ever find our way back to the place we used to be? I thought about how things used to be, how we had first met, how everything felt so easy and natural. We had been so in love, so sure that we were meant to be together. But now, it felt like we were two people just trying to figure out how to coexist without tearing each other apart. We had lost that spark, that connection, and I wasn't sure if it was something we could get back. As I lay there in the dark, I realized that maybe it wasn't about getting back to what we had. Maybe it was about accepting where we were now and deciding what we wanted moving forward. Maybe it was time to stop pretending and face the reality that things had changed. We couldn't go back to who we were, but maybe we could move forward into something new, whether that meant trying to rebuild our relationship or parting ways altogether. The thought was terrifying, but it also felt like the most honest thing I could do. The following days passed in a blur, each one blending into the next as Meredith and I navigated through the uncertainty that had settled between us. The house felt quieter, emptier somehow, and the weight of unspoken thoughts hung in the air. It wasn't that we didn't care about each other, but we both seemed to be grappling with the realization that the relationship we had was no longer what it used to be. We continued to live together, of course, because we hadn't made any major decisions yet. But everything felt off. Even the smallest things, the way Meredith would leave her coffee mug on the kitchen counter without rinsing it, the way I would absent-mindedly forget to put the trash out, those things, once so insignificant, now seemed to have an extra layer of meaning. It was as if every little act was a reflection of the larger issue we were avoiding. We were slowly growing apart. It wasn't a dramatic shift, but it was noticeable. And with each passing day, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were on borrowed time. I'd wake up in the morning and see Meredith beside me, but instead of feeling the warmth I once did, there was an emotional coldness that I couldn't ignore. The affection we once shared seemed like a distant memory, like something that belonged to a time when everything was simpler, when we were just two people madly in love with each other. But now, we were two people trying to figure out how to coexist in the same space without things falling apart. One evening, after dinner, I found myself standing by the window, looking out into the night. The street was quiet, the only sound coming from the faint rustling of leaves in the breeze. Meredith was in the other room, scrolling through her phone, and for a moment, I felt like I was a stranger in my own life. I thought back to the early days of our relationship. We had been so full of energy, so excited about life and the future. We talked for hours about our dreams, our goals, the things we wanted to do together. There was a sense of adventure in everything we did, a sense that we were unstoppable when we were together. But now, all of that seemed so far away. The person I had fallen in love with was still there, somewhere, but I wasn't sure if we could ever get back to the place we once were. Meredith walked into the room, interrupting my thoughts. She stood in the doorway for a moment, watching me, before finally speaking. "I've been thinking a lot," she said, her voice soft but tinged with a hint of uncertainty. "About us." I turned to face her, my heart skipping a beat. I had a feeling we were about to have another one of those difficult conversations, the kind that neither of us really wanted but both knew was inevitable. "What about us?" I asked, trying to sound casual, though I could feel the tension rising between us. "I don't know," she admitted, sitting down on the couch. "I just don't feel the same anymore. And I don't think you do either. I think we're both just stuck. Master 2. R. Is one had it dissolves of life." Her words hit me hard, but I couldn't deny the truth in them. It wasn't that I didn't care about her, I still did, deeply, but the feelings we once shared seemed to have faded, and I wasn't sure how to bring them back. "I feel the same way," I said, the honesty surprising even me. "I don't know what happened, but it's like we've lost something along the way. And I don't know how to get it back." Meredith sighed, looking down at her hands. "I don't want to let go of what we had. But I also don't want to keep pretending. It's like we're just going through the motions, and I don't think that's fair to either of us. Thanks for watching this feel." We sat in silence for a few moments, both of us trying to process everything that had been said. I felt the weight of the situation pressing down on me, and I could tell Meredith felt the same way. Neither of us wanted to give up on what we had, but at the same time, we couldn't ignore the fact that something had changed between us. "I think we need to be honest with ourselves," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "We can't keep pretending that everything's fine when it's not. Maybe we need to figure out what we really want, whether that's staying together or going our separate ways." Meredith nodded, her eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and understanding. "I don't want to lose you, but I also don't want to keep living like this. We deserve more than just surviving. We deserve to be happy." I could see the pain in her eyes, and it mirrored the pain I was feeling inside. It wasn't easy to admit, but I knew she was right. We both deserved more than this, more than a relationship that felt like it was slowly falling apart at the seams. The next few days were filled with more conversations, but none of them were easy. We talked about our future, our past, and whether we could find a way to rebuild what we once had. It wasn't a conversation we could have in one sitting, and every time we talked about it, the emotions felt a little bit heavier. But we were both determined to figure it out. We couldn't just throw away everything we had built together, but we also couldn't continue pretending that things were okay when they weren't. One evening, after another long discussion, we agreed that we needed a break just a few days apart to clear our heads and think. We both needed space to figure out what we wanted, to really evaluate our feelings and decide if we could move forward together or if it was time to let go. It wasn't an easy decision, but it felt like the right one. We didn't know what the future would hold, but we knew that we couldn't keep living in this emotional limbo. We needed to take a step back, to breathe, and to really think about what we wanted for ourselves and for our relationship. As I sat alone in the quiet of the apartment that night, I realized something. Sometimes, love isn't enough. Sometimes, two people can love each other deeply, but that doesn't mean they're meant to stay together. Maybe we were just two people who had grown apart, and maybe that was okay. But I also knew that we weren't done yet. Not completely. Not yet. There was still a part of me that wanted to fight for us. But at the same time, I knew that sometimes, fighting for something doesn't mean holding on to it at all costs. Sometimes, it means letting go. The days apart felt like a lifetime. It wasn't that we were completely out of contact. We exchanged a few texts here and there, brief messages just to check in. But the space between us felt vast, and with every passing day, the weight of the situation grew heavier. It was strange, being in the same house but not really sharing the same space. I couldn't help but reflect on everything, on how we'd gotten to this point. There had been so many good times, so many happy memories. How had we gotten here? How had we let things slip so far? I spent a lot of time alone during those days. The quiet was deafening at times, and I often found myself lost in thought. I'd go for long walks to clear my head, trying to make sense of everything, to figure out what it was I wanted. Every step I took, I thought about Meredith, about the person she was, about the things I loved about her, and about the things that had changed. It wasn't just her, though. I had changed too. I had become more distant, more withdrawn. I didn't know when it happened, but somewhere along the way, I had stopped being the person I used to be. I had stopped being the person she fell in love with. And that was just as much a part of the problem as anything else. The days without her gave me time to think about what I wanted from life, from love, and from myself. It was a painful process, but necessary. I couldn't keep living in this space where everything felt uncertain, where every interaction felt like a reminder of what we had lost. One night, I sat in the living room, the lights dimmed low, and I realized that I couldn't keep living in this limbo. It wasn't fair to either of us. We had to make a decision one way or the other. We couldn't keep drifting through this fog. It was time to face the music. Meredith came home later that evening. She looked tired, like she had been through the ringer just as much as I had. We hadn't spoken much in the last few days, so there was a sense of awkwardness in the air as we both sat down. She didn't say anything at first, and neither did I. We just sat there, the silence between us thick and heavy. Finally, Meredith broke the silence. "I've been thinking," she said softly, her voice almost fragile. "I know we agreed to take a break, but I think we need to talk about where we stand. We can't keep avoiding this." I nodded, feeling the lump in my throat. She was right. We couldn't keep pretending that everything was okay. The uncertainty was eating away at both of us, and it was time to have the difficult conversation. "We need to be honest," I said, my voice steady but unsure. "About everything. About where we are, and where we're going. We can't keep going like this. Something's got to give." Meredith sighed deeply, her eyes glistening as she looked down at her hands. "I don't know what happened to us," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know when we started slipping away from each other, but I feel it. And I think you do too." "I do," I admitted. I've felt it for a while. But I don't know if I'm ready to let go. I don't know if I'm ready to say goodbye. She looked up at me then, her eyes filled with a mix of sadness and understanding. Neither am I, she said quietly. But I also don't want to stay in something that's just stagnant. We deserve more than that. We sat there for a long time, neither of us saying anything. The weight of what we were talking about was too much to bear. Saying goodbye wasn't easy, but neither was pretending everything was fine when we both knew it wasn't. Finally, after what felt like hours, I spoke again. What if we take a break, not from each other, but from the pressure? I suggested. What if we just let ourselves breathe for a little while longer, without all the expectations? Meredith looked at me, her expression softening. What do you mean? I mean, what if we stop trying to force things, I said. What if we just let things unfold naturally, without any pressure to fix everything all at once? Maybe we just need time. Not to be apart, but to figure out who we are individually and see where that takes us. Meredith seemed to think about this for a moment, her eyes searching mine for some sign that this was the right decision. Maybe that's what we need, she said slowly. Maybe we need to stop trying to control everything, and just see where it goes. But I need to know, are we doing this because we're giving up, or because we still want to try? That was the million-dollar question. I didn't know the answer. I wanted to believe that we could still fix things, that we could get back to the love we once had. But at the same time, I couldn't ignore the reality that sometimes, letting go was the healthiest thing you could do for both people involved. I don't know, I said honestly, but I think we owe it to ourselves to try, just one more time. Without pressure. Without expectations. Let's see where it goes. But we need to promise each other that we'll be honest about what we feel, no matter what. Meredith nodded, her eyes filled with tears that she was trying to hold back. I promise, she said softly. And in that moment, I realized that this wasn't the end. It wasn't a goodbye. It was just a step forward, a step into the unknown, where we both had the chance to figure out what we truly wanted. The days that followed our conversation felt like a strange mix of hope and uncertainty. Meredith and I had decided to take a step back from the pressure of fixing everything all at once. We agreed to give each other space to breathe without the weight of expectations hanging over us. But the line between hope and fear was thin, and every day felt like walking a tightrope. We began to slowly adjust to this new rhythm, one that wasn't defined by constant questioning or trying to force things to be better. It was like we were testing the waters, unsure of how deep or shallow the pool was, but still willing to dip our toes in. One of the first things we both realized was how much we had taken each other for granted. In the past, we had both been so caught up in the day-to-day routine of life that we forgot to truly see each other. We hadn't stopped caring, but we had stopped connecting in the way we once did. We didn't laugh as much as we used to, and we didn't have those deep, late-night conversations about life, dreams, and the future. It was like we were just coexisting, moving through the motions, without really being present. But now, with this new arrangement, we started to reconnect in small ways. One morning, as we were having breakfast together, I caught Meredith looking at me over her coffee, the faintest hint of a smile on her lips. It wasn't much, but in that moment, it felt like we had found something we had lost. I've been thinking, Meredith said, breaking the silence, about what you said the other night. About taking a break, but not from each other. I think it's helping. I mean, it's not perfect, but I think it's a step in the right direction. I nodded, feeling a sense of relief that we were on the same page. I agree. It feels different, but it also feels more real, like we're not pretending anymore. Meredith took a sip of her coffee, her eyes thoughtful. Yeah, I think we've been pretending for a long time. Pretending that everything was okay when it wasn't. But I don't want to keep pretending anymore. I want us to work, but I don't want to force it. I could feel the weight of her words. It wasn't just about fixing things, it was about being honest with each other about where we stood and what we wanted. For so long, we had tried to make everything fit into a neat little box, but the truth was, relationships weren't neat. They were messy, complicated, and sometimes, they needed room to breathe. We don't need to have all the answers right now, I said, my voice softer than usual. We just need to figure out if we still want the same things. And if we do, then we can take it one step at a time. No rush. Meredith smiled again, her eyes softening. I like that. No rush. Just figuring it out. The days went on like this, with us learning how to live together again, but without the constant pressure to make everything perfect. We found comfort in the small things, the quiet mornings, the casual conversations, the moments when we could just be ourselves without overthinking everything. But it wasn't without its challenges. There were still moments of doubt, times when we both wondered if we were making the right choice. The uncertainty lingered, like a cloud hanging over us, but it wasn't as suffocating as it had been before. We were learning to live with it, to embrace the unknown. One evening, about a week after our decision to take things slowly, we sat down together in the living room. The TV was off, and the soft glow of the lamp illuminated the room in a warm, comfortable light. For the first time in a long while, we just talked about everything and nothing. About the things we had been avoiding, and about the things we still wanted to achieve together. "I've been thinking," Meredith said, looking at me with a serious expression, "about the future. Not just about us, but about what I want out of life, you know?" I looked at her, intrigued. "What do you mean?" She took a deep breath, collecting her thoughts. "I think I've spent a lot of time focusing on what I thought I should want. What I thought would make me happy. But I don't know if I've ever really taken the time to figure out what I actually want. Not for anyone else, but for me." Her words resonated deeply with me. I realized that I, too, had been caught up in the idea of what our relationship should look like, rather than what it actually was or could be. I had been so focused on the shoulds that I had neglected the wants. "I get that," I said slowly. "I think I've been doing the same thing. I've been so focused on keeping things together that I haven't really thought about what I want, what makes me happy, separate from this relationship. Maybe we both need to spend some time figuring that out." Meredith nodded, her eyes thoughtful. "Yeah, I think so. I think we've been relying too much on each other for happiness, and we forgot how to find it on our own." It was a sobering realization, but a necessary one. We couldn't keep relying on each other to fill every gap, to make each other feel complete. We had to find that completeness within ourselves first. "We've been so focused on the US that we forgot about the me," I said with a small smile. Meredith chuckled softly, nodding. "Exactly." That night, as we sat there together, I realized something important. The uncertainty, the distance, it was all a part of the process. We didn't have to have it all figured out right away. We just had to be willing to be honest with each other, to take things one day at a time, and to give ourselves the space to grow individually and together. Maybe, just maybe, this was how we were going to find our way back to each other. Not by forcing it, but by giving ourselves permission to be who we really were, without the pressure of expectations. The journey was far from over, but for the first time in a long time I felt like we were headed in the right direction. As the days passed, the air between Meredith and me began to shift. We were still working through the discomfort of the unknown, but there was something different now, a sense of calm, of shared understanding that hadn't been there before. Our decision to take a step back and give each other space had given us both room to breathe, and it was starting to feel like we were beginning to rebuild not our old relationship but something new, something that was uniquely ours. It wasn't easy, of course. There were still moments when we both felt the weight of the uncertainty. There were times when we looked at each other and wondered if we were making the right choice. But those moments were fewer now, and they didn't feel as overwhelming. We were learning to take it one day at a time, not trying to rush things or force any conclusions before we were ready. One afternoon, as I was sitting at the kitchen table, working on some personal projects, Meredith walked into the room, her face lighting up when she saw me. It had become a little routine by now. She'd come in, we'd exchange a smile, maybe a few words about our day. It was small, but it was real. And that's what I'd been missing. "I was thinking," she said, leaning against the counter, "maybe we should take a weekend trip. Just the two of us. Nothing fancy, just a change of scenery. Get away for a little while, clear our heads." I looked up from my laptop, surprised by the suggestion. It was a good idea, and the more I thought about it, the more I liked it. We hadn't been on a real trip together in a long time, not since everything had started to shift. A weekend away could be just what we needed to reconnect in a different way, to break the routine and get out of our heads for a while. "Yeah, that sounds great," I said, feeling a spark of excitement. "Where were you thinking?" "Instead of the Mwago of the Ire, and see Terry and Persidit. Meredith shrugged, a playful smile tugging at her lips. I don't know. Maybe a cabin in the woods. Somewhere quiet, where we don't have to think about anything. Just relax and be us. The idea of being in a secluded cabin, away from the distractions of daily life, sounded perfect. It was exactly what we needed: a reset, a chance to spend time together without the noise, without the constant worry about our relationship. It wasn't about fixing everything all at once, but about allowing ourselves the space to enjoy each other again, to remember why we were together in the first place. I love that idea, I said, already thinking about how nice it would be to get away from everything for a bit. Over the next few days, we planned the trip together. We didn't rush it, but we took our time deciding on the details. It felt like a small victory, a sign that we were moving forward, even if we didn't have all the answers yet. The trip wasn't going to solve everything, but it was a step in the right direction, a chance to reconnect in a new way. When the weekend finally arrived, we packed our bags and headed out. The drive to the cabin was filled with comfortable silence. The kind of silence that felt like companionship rather than distance. We talked about the little things: our favorite songs on the radio, the best snacks to bring on a trip, the things we wanted to do once we arrived. It wasn't heavy, it wasn't forced, it was just easy. For the first time in a long time, we were simply enjoying each other's company without the weight of all the things that had been hanging over us. The cabin itself was perfect. It was small but cozy, with a crackling fire in the living room and a big window that looked out over the forest. We spent the first evening there curled up on the couch, watching the flames dance in the fire, the outside world feeling miles away. This was a good idea, I said, looking over at Meredith, who was wrapped in a blanket beside me. I'm glad you think so, she said, her eyes soft as she smiled at me. I needed this. We needed this. And for the first time in a while, I felt like we were on the right path. We didn't have to figure everything out right then and there. We didn't need to make any big decisions in the next 48 hours. We just needed to be present, to enjoy the simplicity of being together again. The next morning, we woke up early, the sunlight streaming through the window. We went for a walk through the woods, the crisp air filling our lungs as we chatted about anything and everything. We didn't talk about our relationship specifically, there was no need. We were just two people, enjoying each other's company in a beautiful place, taking the time to remember what made us happy, both individually and together. It wasn't a perfect moment, but it was real. And sometimes, that's enough. That night, we sat outside by the fire pit, the stars shining brightly above us. We were both quiet for a while, lost in our own thoughts, the only sound being the crackling of the fire and the occasional rustle of the trees in the wind. Finally, Meredith spoke, her voice softer than usual. You know, I think I've been so focused on what's wrong that I forgot to appreciate what's still good. Thank you, sis. Thank you, see, and there come by. I looked over at her, surprised by the vulnerability in her voice. It wasn't something she often showed, but I could tell that the trip had given her a new perspective. It had given us both a new perspective. I get that, I said quietly. I think I've been doing the same. We've been so wrapped up in what's not working, that we've lost sight of what is working. She nodded, her eyes meeting mine. I don't want to lose what we have. But I also don't want to keep pretending that everything's okay when it's not. I think we just need to focus on what we can control, and take things one step at a time. And that was the truth. We couldn't fix everything overnight, but we could take small steps toward rediscovering what we had, steps toward understanding what we truly wanted, both as individuals and as a couple. It wasn't going to be easy, but it felt like we were on the right path. And for the first time in a long time, I felt hopeful. The weekend trip had given us the breathing space we desperately needed. There was a certain lightness in the air when we returned home, as though the distance had allowed us to reset in some way. It wasn't a magical fix, and there were still plenty of unresolved feelings and doubts, but something had shifted. For the first time in a long time, Meredith and I found ourselves talking less about our issues and more about our future. When we got back to the apartment, the usual routine resumed, but it felt different now. The heavy silence wasn't there anymore. Instead, we shared little moments, snippets of conversation, gentle touches, laughter over the most mundane things. It wasn't grand gestures, but it was the kind of subtle connection that had been missing for so long. Have you thought more about what you want to do with your life? I asked Meredith one evening, as we were preparing dinner together. It was a simple question, one that didn't have anything to do with us as a couple directly, but it felt important. She looked thoughtful as she chopped vegetables. I think I've been too focused on what I should do, or what people expect of me. I want to take more time figuring out what I want. What really makes me feel alive? Her answer made something click in my mind. I realized that, for both of us, this time apart had given us the chance to reconnect with our own individual desires and needs. We had spent so long in a bubble, caught up in each other's expectations, that we had forgotten to ask ourselves what made us happy on our own. And it wasn't just about romantic love, it was about self-love, self-growth, and rediscovering our passions. I think I'm at that point too, I said, setting the knife down. I've been so focused on keeping the relationship going that I forgot to ask myself if I'm happy doing what I'm doing, and if I'm truly being the person I want to be. I've been living for us, but I think I need to start living for myself too. There was a pause as we both absorbed what we had said. It felt like a breakthrough, an honest moment between the two of us where we acknowledged that we were more than just a couple. We were individuals first, with our own dreams and aspirations, and that was something we had to honor. I think we've both been trying to fit ourselves into a box that doesn't quite work anymore, Meredith said, looking up at me. Maybe we need to redefine what our relationship looks like, not by the rules we set before, but by what feels right now. Her words made me realize that we didn't need to go back to who we were before. We didn't need to try to recreate some idealized version of our relationship. What we needed was to build something new, something that worked for who we were today. And that was okay. We didn't have to force it. Over the next few weeks, we continued to take things slowly, but with more intention. We focused on being present with each other, on having fun, and on rediscovering what made us happy. We went on more walks together, spent time trying new hobbies, and even started cooking new recipes. Just enjoying the act of being with each other without the weight of expectations. One of the most significant changes was the way we communicated. We stopped holding back. When something bothered us, we talked about it immediately instead of letting it fester. There were still tough conversations, but they felt less like confrontations and more like opportunities to understand each other better. It was as though we had both learned to be more open, more vulnerable, and less afraid of what might happen if we said what was truly on our minds. I think we've come a long way, I said to Meredith one night, as we sat on the couch, a glass of wine in hand. It's not perfect, but it feels real. It feels like we're both really trying to understand each other, and not just go through the motions. She smiled, her eyes soft. I agree. I think we're finally being honest with ourselves. And with each other. It wasn't a happily ever after moment, and it wasn't a declaration that everything was magically fixed. But in that moment, I realized that we were in a much healthier place than we had been in months. We were no longer stuck in a cycle of pretending, of ignoring the things that needed to be addressed. We were finally starting to build a relationship that was based on honesty, respect, and above all mutual understanding. Do you think we're going to be okay? I asked, my voice a little hesitant. Meredith didn't hesitate. She took my hand in hers, giving it a gentle squeeze. I don't know what the future holds, but I think we're on the right track. We're taking it one day at a time, and that's all we can do. But yes, I think we're going to be okay. This is though not hell please from the following UHN. There was a sense of peace that settled over me as I heard her words. For the first time in a long time I felt hopeful. Not because everything was fixed or perfect, but because we were finally being honest with each other, and we were willing to work through the tough stuff, together. We didn't have to have all the answers. We didn't need to know exactly where we were going. All we had to do was keep walking forward, step by step, hand in hand, and see where the journey took us. As the weeks went by, things between Meredith and me seemed to settle into a new normal. It wasn't the same as before. There was no pretending, no expectations of perfection, but it was better. We were building something real, based on the foundation of honesty and mutual respect. One evening, as we sat in the living room, a familiar comfort settled between us. It was quiet, not the kind of silence filled with tension, but a peaceful, content kind of silence. I looked over at Meredith, who was absorbed in a book, and I couldn't help but feel a deep sense of gratitude. She had been through a lot, and so had I. But despite the struggles, Here we were still together, still finding our way. I put down the book I was reading and turned to her. You know, I've been thinking a lot about everything we've been through. The highs, the lows, and all the stuff in between. And I think I finally understand something I didn't before. Meredith looked up from her book, raising an eyebrow. What's that? I think I understand now that it's okay for things to not always be perfect. Relationships, life, it's all messy. But it's the mess that makes us who we are. It's the struggles, the challenges, the hard times that help us grow. And I think we've grown, even if we didn't realize it at the time. Her eyes softened, and she set her book down, giving me her full attention. I think you're right. I used to think everything had to be perfect, that we had to always have it together. But I'm starting to see that the imperfections are just as important. It's how we handle them that matters. I smiled at her, feeling a deep sense of relief. We had spent so much time trying to fix things, trying to make everything fall into place, that we had forgotten that perfection wasn't the goal. The goal was to be real with each other, to face the tough times, learn from them, and come out stronger. We've come a long way, I said quietly, the words feeling heavier than I expected. And I'm proud of us for that. Meredith reached out and took my hand in hers, squeezing it gently. Me too. I know we still have a long way to go, but I'm not afraid of the journey anymore. We're doing it together, and that's all that matters. We wanted to stay. It was a simple sentiment, but it hit me with such clarity. It wasn't about the destination, it was about the process. The journey, with all its bumps and turns, was where the real work happened. And we were both committed to taking it one step at a time, together. The following weekend, we decided to spend the day doing something completely different. We didn't want to get stuck in a routine, so we took a spontaneous trip to a nearby hiking trail. We weren't sure where we were going, but we didn't need a plan. The beauty of it was in the unpredictability, the freedom to explore without pressure. To enjoy the moment without worrying about what came next. The hike itself was challenging, but in the best way. We climbed rocky paths, crossed streams, and laughed at how unprepared we were for the terrain. We didn't take ourselves too seriously, and that's what made it so enjoyable. We were in it together, navigating the physical challenges just as we had learned to navigate the emotional ones. At the top of the hill, we stopped to catch our breath, the view before us breathtaking. The sun was setting, casting a warm glow over the landscape, and for a moment, everything felt still. There was no pressure, no uncertainty, just the two of us, standing side by side, taking in the beauty of the world around us. This is perfect, Meredith said, looking out at the horizon. It's just us, the view and the moment. No need to figure anything out. No need. I stood beside her, looking at the same view, but feeling a deeper sense of contentment. We had spent so much time trying to figure things out, so much energy trying to control the outcome. But in this moment, I realized that maybe the answers weren't as important as the experience itself. Maybe the beauty of life was in the moments we didn't try to overthink. We've made it this far, I said, my voice steady as I turned to face her. And I'm happy. I'm really happy with where we are. Meredith smiled softly, her eyes reflecting the warmth of the sunset. Me too. I think we've learned to let go of the things we can't control and embrace the things we can. We stood there for a few moments, taking it all in, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like we were truly in sync. We didn't have all the answers, but we were learning to enjoy the process of figuring things out together. There was no rush, no pressure. It was just us, walking side by side, taking each step as it came. As we made our way back down the trail, hand in hand, I realized that this was the essence of what we had always wanted. It wasn't about grand gestures or perfect moments, it was about being there for each other. Through the ups and downs, the struggles and the victories, we had learned to appreciate the little things, the quiet moments that made up our everyday lives. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. The days after our hiking trip felt lighter, filled with a sense of ease we hadn't experienced in a long time. The weekend had been a reminder that sometimes, stepping away from the chaos and letting go of the need for answers could be the most healing thing we could do. We weren't rushing anything anymore, we were simply living, day by day, with the understanding that things would unfold as they were meant to. But life had a way of throwing curveballs when you least expected it. It was a Tuesday evening when it happened. Meredith came home from work later than usual, her face flushed and her eyes a little distant. She walked in and immediately went to the kitchen, setting her things down without saying a word. I could tell something was wrong, but I didn't want to push her. I waited for her to say something, to break the silence, but she seemed lost in her thoughts. Finally, after a few moments of quiet, I asked, "Hey, what's going on? You seem off." Asability are ones, in the groen de colden stating the word. Meredith sighed, leaning against the counter, her gaze fixed on the floor. I don't know, it's just, work's been really stressful lately, and I feel like I'm not doing enough. Like I'm constantly running around, trying to keep everything together, but I'm not getting anywhere. I could see the frustration in her eyes, the weariness that had started to creep into her demeanor. Meredith had always been the kind of person who carried a lot on her shoulders. She worked hard, pushed herself to the limit, and rarely asked for help. But lately, it seemed like the weight of everything was starting to take its toll. I get that, I said, moving closer to her, wanting to offer some comfort. You've been juggling so much, and I can see how hard you're working. But you don't have to do it all on your own. You don't have to carry everything by yourself. She looked up at me, her eyes searching mine, as if she were looking for something she couldn't quite find. I don't know how to stop, though. I feel like if I slow down, everything will fall apart. Like, I'll let people down. I could hear the self-imposed pressure in her voice, the feeling that she had to be everything to everyone. It was something I understood too well. I had spent my own share of time trying to meet expectations, others and my own, and it was exhausting. But sometimes, the hardest thing to do was to allow yourself to take a step back. Listen to me, I said softly, taking her hand in mine. You're not a superhero. You don't have to do it all, and you don't have to carry everything by yourself. It's okay to ask for help, to lean on the people who care about you. Meredith looked at me, a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. But I don't want to disappoint anyone. You won't disappoint anyone by taking care of yourself, I said, squeezing her hand gently. In fact, you'll be able to show up better for the people who matter if you give yourself the space to breathe. That isn't very in B1. For a long moment, we just stood there, the weight of the conversation hanging in the air. Meredith was still processing, still unsure how to let go of the expectations she had placed on herself. But in that moment, I knew that we were learning something important about each other, about ourselves, and about the way we navigated life together. I don't know how to stop, she admitted quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. But I think I'm ready to try. Good, I said, offering her a reassuring smile. We'll figure it out, together. No one has to do everything on their own. She smiled back, the weight in her eyes lifting just a little. Thanks. I think I needed to hear that. It is no help you ate. Over the next few weeks, things started to change. Meredith took a step back from the overwhelming demands at work, and we both made a conscious effort to be more present with each other. We stopped letting the stresses of our individual lives consume us. Instead, we leaned into the small moments, the ones that made us feel connected. We started setting aside time for ourselves not just as a couple, but as individuals. We made sure to have quiet mornings with coffee and books, to go for walks without talking about responsibilities, to enjoy the simplicity of being in each other's company without the weight of expectations hanging over us. One night, as we were sitting on the couch, watching a movie, Meredith turned to me and said, "You know, I think I'm finally starting to understand what you meant about not rushing things. About letting life unfold without trying to control it all." I looked at her, a sense of pride welling up inside me. "Yeah? How's that been going?" She smiled softly, the kind of smile that reached her eyes. "It's been hard, but it feels right. I'm starting to give myself permission to slow down, to let go of the constant pressure. And it feels freeing." I nodded, feeling a sense of relief wash over me. We weren't perfect, and we didn't have everything figured out. But we were getting there, slowly and surely. We had learned to be more patient with ourselves, to let go of the need for everything to be perfect, and to focus on the things that truly mattered. "We're doing this," I said, my voice full of quiet confidence. "We're figuring it out, one step at a time." Meredith leaned into me, resting her head on my shoulder, and I couldn't help but feel a sense of contentment. The journey wasn't over, and there were still challenges ahead. But we had learned something important, that we didn't have to have it all figured out. We just had to keep showing up, keep trying, and trust that we were on the right path. And for the first time in a long time, I felt peace. Not because everything was perfect, but because we were facing life together, side by side, with all the ups and downs it brought. The days that followed felt different, lighter, even. Meredith and I had found a new rhythm, one that wasn't about rushing through life or trying to control everything. It was about living in the moment, appreciating the small things, and focusing on what really mattered. One evening, as we were sitting on the balcony, watching the sunset, I felt a sense of calm that I hadn't known in a long time. The world around us seemed so quiet, so still, and for the first time in a while, I could feel the weight lifting off my shoulders. Everything we had been through, all the struggles, the doubts, it all felt like it was starting to settle into a place of acceptance. We were no longer trying to force the relationship into something it wasn't. We were simply being, and that was enough. "I've been thinking," Meredith said, breaking the silence, her voice soft yet filled with a certain resolve, "about what you said earlier about not rushing things. About letting go of the pressure." I turned toward her, giving her my full attention. "Yeah? What's on your mind?" "I think I'm starting to see it. The way I've been putting so much pressure on myself, thinking I had to have everything figured out. But maybe that's the point. Maybe there's no final destination. Maybe it's just about walking together, one step at a time." Her words hit me with an unexpected clarity. We had both spent so much time trying to control everything, the direction of our relationship, the way we were supposed to feel, the pace at which we were supposed to move. But now, we were learning to just walk side by side, letting things unfold naturally. It wasn't perfect, and it wasn't always easy, but it felt real. And for both of us, that was enough. "I think we've been so focused on trying to fix things that we've forgotten the simple truth," I said, the realization coming to me in that moment. "We don't need to fix anything. We just need to let it be. Let it grow." Meredith smiled, the same soft smile she had given me on that hiking trip. "Yeah. Maybe we've been too worried about what's next. Instead, we should focus on what we have right now." I nodded, my heart swelling with a sense of peace. We had both been so consumed with the idea of the future, of where we were headed, of whether we were doing it right, but the truth was, we had no way of knowing. And maybe that was okay. Maybe the beauty of it all was in the not knowing, in the trust we had in each other to walk through life together, regardless of what came next. Over the next few weeks, we continued to focus on the present. We didn't talk about the future too much. We didn't make grand plans or set unrealistic expectations. We simply existed in the moment, finding joy in the small things, the quiet mornings, the spontaneous conversations, the simple acts of kindness that reminded us of how much we still cared for each other. But that didn't mean we weren't still learning. As our relationship grew, so did our understanding of ourselves. We both began to recognize the importance of self-care, of giving each other the space to grow individually as well as together. We didn't have to be everything to each other, we just had to be there when it mattered most. One Saturday afternoon, as we were out running errands, I noticed Meredith stop in front of a small bookstore. She had always loved reading, and I hadn't seen her pick up a new book in a while. "Do you want to go in?" I asked, sensing the quiet desire in her eyes. She smiled, a spark of excitement lighting up her face. "Yeah, I've been craving a good book lately." Was not at Mactabite. We spent the next hour browsing through the aisles, the soft sound of pages turning filling the air as we shared recommendations and favorites. It was such a simple moment, but it felt meaningful. We didn't have to be on some grand adventure to feel connected. We didn't need big gestures or extravagant plans. Sometimes, the best moments were the ones that happened quietly, in between the noise of everyday life. As we walked out of the bookstore, a small bag of new books in hand, I realized something important. We had been so focused on the idea of fixing our relationship, of making it fit into some idealized version of what it should be. But now we were learning to just live it, to be with each other, as we were, without the need for constant validation or reassurance. It wasn't perfect. There were still moments of doubt, of uncertainty. But we were finding strength in those moments, not running away from them. We had learned to embrace the imperfection, to let go of the pressure to be something we weren't. And in doing so, We had created something that felt stronger, more genuine, and more lasting than anything we could have forced. That evening, as we sat on the couch with our new books, our legs tangled together, I realized that this was what we had been searching for all along. It wasn't some grand answer, some ultimate resolution. It was simply about being together, about growing and learning, about accepting the quiet moments just as much as the loud ones. And for the first time in a long time, I felt at peace. Not because everything was perfect, but because we were finally allowing ourselves to be present with each other, to exist without the need for everything to be figured out. We were enough, as we were. And that was all we needed. The months that followed were some of the most peaceful I could remember. Meredith and I had found a new rhythm, one that wasn't built on expectations or the pressure of trying to be perfect. It was about being in the moment, allowing ourselves to grow both as individuals and as a couple. We were slowly learning that the most important thing wasn't how perfect we could make our relationship, but how real we could be with each other. One Saturday, as we sat on the balcony sipping coffee, I watched the way the sun hit Meredith's face. The soft glow on her skin, the slight smile playing at the corner of her lips, it was all so simple, but in that moment, it felt like everything I had been looking for. You know, I began, breaking the comfortable silence. I've been thinking a lot lately. About us, and about everything we've been through. It feels like we're in a better place now, but I can't help but think about how far we've come. Meredith looked over at me, her eyes warm. Yeah, I've been thinking the same thing. It hasn't been easy, but I think we've both learned so much. I've learned to let go of the pressure I used to put on myself, and on us. I nodded, grateful for the way she had embraced the changes we'd both been through. It's funny. I used to think that love was all about the big moments, about grand gestures and fireworks. But now, I think it's more about the quiet ones. The simple moments, the ones when you're just there, with each other. That's when you really see how much you mean to each other. They remained hallandescentuo, in the system. Meredith smiled softly, her gaze turning to the horizon. I think you're right. It's the little things, isn't it? It's not about trying to be perfect, it's about being honest with each other and showing up when it matters. I reached out and took her hand in mine, feeling the comfort of the connection between us. It wasn't flashy, it wasn't perfect, but it was genuine. It was real. We've both changed, I said. I think that's one of the biggest lessons I've learned. We've both grown, and I don't think that's a bad thing. We're not the same people we were when we first started dating, and that's okay. It's actually kind of beautiful. In a way. Meredith nodded, her expression thoughtful. I think that's the key. We don't have to stay the same, but we have to be willing to adapt, to grow. As individuals, and together. It's the growing together part that really matters. It wasn't just about loving each other anymore. It was about learning to love ourselves first, and trusting that we could support each other through whatever came next. There was a deep understanding between us now, one that wasn't rushed or forced. It was rooted in patience, in the kind of quiet trust that comes from being vulnerable with each other, from being willing to face the hard moments together. That afternoon, we spent hours on the balcony, talking about everything and nothing at all. Our hopes, our dreams, our favorite memories from the past. The conversation flowed effortlessly, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like we were truly in sync. It wasn't about finding the answers to everything, it was about enjoying the conversation itself, enjoying the time we had together. When evening came, we decided to cook dinner together. We didn't follow any recipe, just picked ingredients we had in the fridge and decided to get creative. It was messy and unplanned, but it was fun. We laughed as we burned the garlic and spilled flour all over the counter. But through it all, there was a warmth between us that had been missing for a long time. A warmth that didn't depend on perfection, but on the willingness to enjoy the process. Even when it didn't go according to plan. As we sat down to eat, Meredith turned to me, her eyes shining in the soft light of the dining room. I'm really glad we're here. I think this is exactly where we're supposed to be. I smiled back at her, feeling the same sense of contentment. Me too. We don't have to have it all figured out, but I'm glad we're doing this. Together. The evening unfolded with more laughter, more easy conversation, and more moments of connection. We didn't need anything more than that, a simple meal, a shared moment, and the peace of knowing that we were on the right path. As we finished up dinner and cleaned the dishes together, I realized that this was the essence of what we had built. Not the grand gestures, not the perfect moments, but the small, everyday acts of love and care that made up our life. It wasn't about chasing perfection, it was about finding joy in the messiness, the imperfection, and the quiet, beautiful moments that came with simply being together. And in that moment, I knew we were stronger than ever. Not because we had all the answers, but because we had learned to embrace the journey together. As the seasons changed, so did our relationship. It wasn't that things were drastically different, but the quiet moments we shared began to feel more meaningful. The days of confusion and uncertainty felt like a distant memory. What remained was a bond built on mutual respect, understanding, and the willingness to face whatever came our way. One chilly autumn evening, after a busy week, Meredith and I found ourselves sitting in front of the fire, wrapped in blankets, watching the flames dance in the hearth. It had become one of our favorite rituals, just sitting together, quietly, without needing to say much at all. "This feels nice," Meredith said, her voice soft, almost content. She turned toward me, her eyes glowing in the flickering light. "Just being here. With you." I looked at her and smiled, feeling a warmth in my chest. "Yeah, it does. I think this is what it's all about. Not the big moments, but these small, quiet ones." Meredith nodded. "It's the little things that matter the most. The everyday stuff. The way we just show up for each other. That's what makes the difference." It had taken time, but I finally understood what she meant. In the beginning, I had thought that love was about grand gestures, about constant excitement and adrenaline. But now, I saw that love was built on something much more profound. It was about the consistency of care, the understanding that you didn't need to constantly be perfect to be worthy of love. It was about showing up, day after day, through the highs and the lows. We sat there for a while, the only sound being the crackling of the fire and the occasional gust of wind outside. The world seemed so far away in that moment. It was as though everything we needed was right there, in that room, in the simple presence of one another. Later that evening, after we had both finished reading, Meredith turned to me, a thoughtful look on her face. "You know, I was thinking, maybe we should start planning something more. Not like a trip or anything, but just something we can look forward to together. Something to keep building on." I raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "Like what?" She shrugged, her expression soft but determined. "I don't know yet. But I want to keep growing, keep learning, and I want to do it with you. Whatever it looks like. I think we've learned so much about each other, and I'm excited to see where we go from here." Her words hit me in a way I hadn't expected. I had been so focused on the present, on not rushing, that I hadn't really thought about the future. But here she was, looking forward with optimism, and it made me realize that while the present was important, we also needed to look ahead. "I like that idea," I said, feeling a spark of excitement myself. "I think we're in a good place now, and we've learned to appreciate what we have. But I'm excited about what's to come, too." We spent the rest of the evening talking about possibilities, the things we could explore, the dreams we could chase together. It wasn't about planning every detail, it was about embracing the potential of the future, knowing that we could face it together. As the weeks went by, we continued to live in the moment, but we also began to look forward to the things we could build. We talked more about our goals, both as individuals and as a couple, and we realized that we weren't just building a relationship. We were building a life, one small step at a time, one conversation at a time. One of the things we realized was that we didn't need to have everything figured out right now. It was okay not to have all the answers. The important thing was that we were committed to each other, to the process, and to creating a life that felt true to who we were. We had both come a long way from the uncertainty we had faced before. The more we talked, the more we understood that the journey wasn't about reaching some final destination, it was about the experiences we shared, the growth we experienced together, and the moments that brought us closer. It was the laughter, the quiet nights, the spontaneous adventures, and the small acts of kindness that made our relationship what it was. And that, to me, was enough. One afternoon, as we sat at the kitchen table, Meredith looked across at me with a smile. "I think we're doing something right. I'm really happy. And I'm really grateful for where we are." I smiled back, my heart full. "I am, too. It's not perfect, and it never will be. but it's ours. And I wouldn't want it any other way. For the first time, I realized that this was the life we were building, the love we were nurturing. It wasn't about perfection, and it wasn't about having it all figured out. It was about being together, learning together, and trusting that whatever came next, we could face it as a team. And in that moment, I felt a deep sense of peace. Not because everything was perfect, but because I knew that we had everything we needed. Together, as winter approached, we found ourselves spending even more time together indoors, embracing the coziness that the cold weather brought. The simple routines we had established, cooking dinner together, long talks over coffee, spontaneous movie nights, became even more meaningful. I had never realized how much I had taken those moments for granted until we'd learned to slow down and truly appreciate them. One evening, after a long week of work, we found ourselves sitting on the couch, wrapped in blankets with a pot of hot cocoa between us. It had snowed earlier that day, and the view from our window was breathtaking: white, untouched snow, blanketing the streets, the soft glow of the streetlights casting a peaceful light on everything. "This feels perfect," Meredith said softly, her voice filled with contentment. She took a sip of her cocoa, her eyes sparkling with that familiar warmth I had grown so fond of. I smiled at her, feeling that same warmth spread through me. "It really does. It's the simple things, isn't it? The rever ones so ones are fain." "Yeah," she said, leaning back into the couch, closing her eyes for a moment. "I've spent so much of my life running after the next big thing, always trying to chase some perfect future. But now I see that the future is just made up of all these little moments. And I'm starting to love them." Her words resonated deeply with me. It wasn't about chasing a perfect future anymore. It wasn't about trying to live up to some idealized version of what our relationship, our life, should be. It was about being in the moment, enjoying each day for what it was, and finding beauty in the simplicity of it all. I reached over and took her hand, squeezing it gently. "I feel the same way. I've learned so much over the past few months. About you, about me, about what really matters." We sat there in silence for a few moments, just enjoying each other's presence and the peaceful stillness of the night. There was no pressure to be anywhere, to do anything. We were simply existing in that moment, and it was enough. That evening, we talked about our plans for the future again, but this time, it wasn't about grand gestures or big goals. It was about the little things we wanted to experience together. A trip we had been talking about for a while, a quiet cabin by the lake, far from the distractions of the world. A dream of buying a little house, somewhere small but cozy, where we could grow old together. Simple dreams, but ones that felt right for us. They weren't about impressing anyone or following some timeline, they were about creating a life that felt true to who we were. The conversation wasn't about any sort of big decision, but it was a reminder that our future didn't have to be perfect. It could be simple. It could be messy. But as long as we were in it together, that was all that mattered. Weeks passed, and with each passing day, we found ourselves feeling more certain in our relationship. We had both been through so much, but we had learned to embrace our imperfections. We didn't need to be everything to each other, but we did need to show up when it mattered. And we had been doing that. We had been showing up, consistently and with love. One snowy weekend, we decided to take a drive to a nearby town for a change of scenery. As we drove through the quiet roads, surrounded by trees heavy with snow, I couldn't help but feel a sense of peace wash over me. The landscape was serene, untouched by the chaos of everyday life. It was just the two of us, the road, and the snow, moving at our own pace. "This is nice," Meredith said, her voice filled with contentment as she looked out the window at the snowy landscape. "It really is," I replied, glancing over at her. "I'm really glad we're doing this. Just taking a moment for ourselves." "Me too," she said with a smile. "It's been so easy to get caught up in everything. But I think we're finally learning to slow down and appreciate the ride." We spent the day wandering through the town, stopping at a local cafe, exploring little shops, and just enjoying the simplicity of the day. There were no grand plans, no major expectations, just two people, walking through life side by side, taking everything in. That night, as we sat at a cozy little diner for dinner, I looked across the table at Meredith, and I felt a sense of gratitude wash over me. We had come so far, and yet it felt like we were just getting started. There were still things we needed to figure out, dreams to chase, but for the first time, I didn't feel anxious about it. I felt calm. I felt ready to take on whatever came next. Whatever happens, I said, reaching for her hand across the table, I know we'll be okay. We've been through so much, but we're still here. Together. She smiled at me, squeezing my hand. Yeah. We are. And we'll keep moving forward. One step at a time. The future was still unknown, but I had no fear of it anymore. We didn't need to know everything. We just needed to keep walking together, with love and trust in each other, and the knowledge that we had built something strong, something worth fighting for. As we drove back home that evening, I knew that the road ahead would be full of ups and downs, of twists and turns, but as long as we were facing it together, we would be okay. And that, I realized, was the most important thing. As winter melted into spring, there was a sense of renewal in the air. The flowers began to bloom, the days grew longer, and the world felt alive again. Meredith and I had found a rhythm that worked for us, one where we were no longer holding on to the past or overthinking the future. We were simply living, day by day, building on the connection that had become the foundation of our relationship. One sunny afternoon, we decided to take a walk in the park, something we hadn't done in a while. The weather was perfect, the kind of day where the sun was warm but the breeze kept it from getting too hot. We walked side by side, the grass beneath our feet, and the sound of birds chirping in the background. It was peaceful, but there was also something exciting about it, a sense of possibility that had started to feel more and more real. I'm glad we're doing this, Meredith said as we walked. Just walking. No rush. No pressure. No pressure. I smiled, glancing over at her. Yeah. Me too. It's nice to just exist in the moment. We walked in comfortable silence for a while, enjoying the simplicity of each other's company. It wasn't awkward, nor was it uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that felt natural, like we didn't need to fill it with words to prove we were still connected. After a while, Meredith spoke again. You know, I've been thinking a lot lately about how far we've come. I mean, think about it, we've been through so much, but we're still here. And we're better for it. I think. I nodded, looking out at the trees as we passed. I've been thinking the same thing. I never imagined we'd get here, but here we are. And I'm grateful for it. It still matters. Meredith paused for a moment, then turned to face me. I think the biggest lesson I've learned is that relationships aren't about perfection. They're about being there for each other, no matter what. It's about showing up. And I think we've learned how to do that. I stopped walking for a moment, looking at her, feeling the weight of her words. We really have, I said softly. And we've learned to show up for ourselves too. We're not perfect, but we've learned how to be real. To embrace the mess, instead of trying to make everything fit into a perfect mold. She smiled, her eyes filled with warmth. Exactly. And I think that's what makes us stronger. We don't have to be perfect, but we have to be honest. With each other, and with ourselves. As we continued walking, I felt a deep sense of peace wash over me. We weren't the same people we had been when we first met, and that was okay. We had changed, grown, and learned so much about ourselves and each other. But we had done it together, and in doing so, we had created something stronger than we could have ever imagined. That evening, as we sat on the porch, watching the sun set behind the trees, I realized that we had reached a new chapter in our relationship. It wasn't a dramatic shift, but it was significant. We had learned to love each other not in spite of our imperfections, but because of them. We had learned that love wasn't about fixing each other, it was about supporting each other through the highs and lows, and finding strength in the moments of vulnerability. I'm proud of us, I said, my voice quiet but full of emotion. We've come a long way. And we've done it together. Meredith looked at me, her eyes soft and filled with love. Me too, and I'm excited for what comes next. Whatever it is, I know we'll face it together. There was a certain peace in those words, a quiet certainty that whatever challenges lay ahead, we could handle them. Not because we were perfect, but because we had learned how to navigate life side by side, with honesty, patience, and love. As we sat there, in the fading light of the day, I realized that this was enough. We didn't need a grand plan, we didn't need everything to be figured out. We just needed to keep showing up, keep being there for each other, and keep trusting that no matter what came next, we would be okay. The journey wasn't over, it had only just begun. But for the first time, I felt ready. Ready for whatever the future held, knowing that as long as we were together, we could face it, and that, I realized, was all I needed to know. Summer arrived with a gentle warmth that seemed to reflect the peace we had found in our lives. The air was filled with the scent of blooming flowers, and the days grew longer, stretching into evening with golden light. Meredith and I spent our weekends enjoying the outdoors, visiting farmers' markets, hiking trails, and even just sitting in the park, watching the world go by. The simplicity of it all was everything we needed. One Saturday, we decided to take a small road trip to a nearby town, one we'd both heard about but never visited. The car ride was filled with the sound of our favorite playlist, the road stretching out in front of us as we joked about the past and made plans for the future. There was no urgency, no rush. We were simply enjoying the journey, both literally and figuratively. As we drove, I turned to Meredith, a thought lingering in my mind. You know, it feels like we've found this balance. This peace, in the midst of everything. She glanced at me, her smile soft but knowing. I feel it too. It's not perfect. It's not always easy. But I think we've learned how to embrace the ups and downs. I think that's the key, I said. It's not about avoiding the hard parts. It's about facing them together. There, so you said. We spent the day in the town, exploring local shops, trying out new food, and simply being in the moment. We didn't make big plans or expect anything extraordinary to happen. It was the kind of day that felt just right because it didn't require anything more than our time and presence. Later, as we sat at a cafe, sipping on iced tea and watching the sun dip behind the mountains in the distance, Meredith turned to me. You know, this is nice. Just being here with you. No pressure, no expectations. Just us, enjoying the moment. I smiled at her, feeling my heart swell with warmth. I couldn't agree more. We don't need anything else, do we? Meredith shook her head, her eyes gleaming. No. I think we have everything we need right here. In that moment, everything felt perfect, even in its imperfection. We had come so far, and yet we didn't need to be anywhere other than where we were together, learning, growing, and loving each other more deeply with each passing day. As we headed back home that evening, I realized that we had truly come full circle. We had started from a place of uncertainty, of doubt, and fear about the future. But now, we had learned to live in the moment, to appreciate the beauty in the simplicity of life, and to cherish each other without the need for perfection. Our relationship had evolved into something stronger, something more authentic, because we had learned how to be real with each other. We had learned that love wasn't about solving everything, but about showing up for each other, supporting each other, and letting life unfold as it would. That night, as we lay in bed, wrapped in each other's arms, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known before. I didn't have all the answers, and I didn't need them. The future was still unknown, but I knew one thing for sure: we would face it together. We had learned that the journey itself was as important as the destination, and as long as we walked it hand in hand, everything would be okay. We've got this, don't we? Meredith whispered, her voice filled with quiet certainty. I kissed the top of her head, holding her a little tighter. Yeah, we've got this. Together. And with that, I drifted off to sleep, content, knowing that no matter what the future held, we were ready. Ready to face it, ready to grow, and ready to embrace whatever came our way. Because we had each other.